Gerrit, thanks so much for your time. I mean, certainly you listen to some of the officials here in Gauteng, the economic hub, and they talk about the influx of people coming into the city, not only from the province, but from the rest of the continent seeking, you know, better opportunities. But obviously this is a strain on the infrastructure, and I imagine that the way that the current city is constructed is not conducive for this influx of population.
Yeah, Vivi, you're right. I think the whole thing, if we just can just remember that every second 2 more people are born on the earth. So it's actually quite amazing, the growth of population. And apart from that, and we're currently at 7.5 billion, but apart from the population growth, there's also obviously the urbanization process.
Yes.
Now, the urbanization process is, there are pull factors and there are push factors, a reason for people moving. But the problem with Africa is that by 2050, we'll probably be 50% and more urbanized. So we're actually now going through that kind of a tipping point. And obviously, as you said, that the infrastructure is under huge pressure. The problem is also that we have some urban development models which are actually built or developed in the modern age, in the modernism, and also European-based. So they are in a way built on private mobility, low density, sprawl, long distances. All these things create very expensive infrastructure because of the distances, a lot of leakages, a lot of loss. So in a way, our models need to be more compact, more integrated, more public transport related. But I'm talking about good public transport, which is actually coming on stream now on a slow basis, but we need to move much faster than that, because we're not going to stop the influx. We need to be prepared for the influx. I think that is probably the biggest problem, why the stress is on the system.
I mean, if we just simplify that operationally on the ground, how do you build a smart and sustainable city?
I think that starting from scratch is easy in one way, but also difficult, because you need momentum, you need capital investment, you need a lot of, it is expensive to build a city. That's why buildings take, or cities take centuries to build. It's over time. People build the city irrespective of who designed it. And cities are also kind of a reflection of our lifestyles. Now, if our lifestyles are based on not smart lifestyles, like private transport and sprawl and those things, then you're going to have that kind of city, because it's the kind of city that evolves. To have a smart city, you have to have a compact city, you have an integrated city, and also integrated land uses to shorten the distances between moving from your home to your work, and those distances are the ones that you actually do most of your life. So be smarter. It's not just about throwing technology. It's about also looking at the structure of the city and how we actually densify the city. We can densify our cities much, much more than they are at the moment. They are very inefficient. Our infrastructure is not being used inefficient. Although they're under stress, they also have a lot of leakages and they have a lot of inefficiencies built into them because of their old city structures.
So, I mean, when you're talking about spatial integration, I imagine that what the Gauteng province is actually trying to do by doing that, by, you know, connecting more people closer to the main economic cities is something that you agree with?
Yes, 100%. I also think that the city is, a lot of change has taken place in the whole city-making process. I think it took some time for South Africa to catch up, because a lot of these concepts have been around since the 1960s and 70s already. But we were we were at that moment still in a separatist society. Now that we're really going integrated, we've opened that door for that integration. So I think Gauteng is definitely moving in the right directions with their corridors of growth, all those development initiatives. But the market must respond to that. And that is still, the market is still looking at development on an individual basis.
I mean, you know, when we talk about a smart city, we also can't ignore the factor of climate change. And right now in Sandton, we've got these huge buildings that are popping up, beautiful looking buildings, but also that spatial separation that you're talking about. Number one, I imagine bringing things closer will reduce road time or time on the road, and therefore contribute less to climate change. But how do we, in the way we physically structure the buildings that are coming up now, ensure that the city is sustainable from a climate change point of view?
See, buildings are some of the components that actually use most of the energy. So if you start getting energy efficiency in the buildings, which is happening more and more, we get off-grid buildings, we get buildings that actually self-sufficient. But not all buildings can be like that. But there's a lot of technologies coming in. And I think that the whole green building movement, the whole Green Building Council, all those efforts, all those amazing thrusts take time to get into the market. So the market is absorbing them now. And I always say there's only one green and that's dollar green. If you don't save time or money or something, people won't do it. But now it's becoming to the point where it becomes economically viable to go green. It's not just more about being hype, or it's not about the emotional stuff anymore. It's real. So if you look at the buildings, I think in South Africa, we used to build buildings that was based on European standards, on European way of life, even European climate situations. That was our basis. While we have actually got a lot of sun, got a lot of heat, a lot of completely different, which we can actually harness. And there are technologies available to be able to do it. So if we start from the building, but we must also look at the structure to densify it. And I think a big thing is happening I think Sandton is a good example. Because of the goud trade, the whole use pattern of Sandton changed. The whole, that is a kind of a catalytic project. Because it's a public transport, you can move more people.
Sure. And
they can actually gear on the densities and create more densities. And that's a very good idea going.
Well, thank you so much for those insights, Gerrit. Of course, that was Gerrit Jordaan, Sustainable Design Specialist.